look forward to answers to this big question.
Oh yes, and there will be questions after the answers.
And there's a theremin.
Yes.
And there's a theremin.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jono. Thank you for joining us.
Good. Thank you. Okay, guys. Yeah. Well, Aitor has just introduced me, but that's me, Jono Podmore. Various pseudonyms. Kumo, if you want to do a search. Metamono is my band, and we work to a very, very strict manifesto where we only allow analog electronic sound sources, and they have to be second-hand or handmade or homemade, in fact. Psychomat is my website and my kind of erstwhile label. And I work at the Hochschule für Musik und Tanz in Köln, which is basically it's the music conservatory in Cologne, and and I run the MA course there. So what I'm looking at today is in the box or out of the box. I worked for years as a producer. All right. Okay. Can everyone hear me anyway? Yeah.
I think broadcast to London too.
Yeah, I'm not going to start again. I'm not going to introduce myself again. There's just too many times you can say your own name before you wear it out. Want to. Yeah, so in the box or out of the box. I worked for years as a engineer and producer, starting engineering, producing tracks in the 80s really. And of course, when I started, it was everything was analog. It was a completely analog world. Analog instruments, analog studios. There was lots of synthesizers. There was a very, very high level of very highly developed technical equipment, particularly tape machines and mixing desks, etc., etc. And so I've seen from that point. I've seen the whole of the digital revolution happen. And I've used this title because anyone who works in professional audio has this question all the time. You know, you get a job, you get an album to mix, whatever, blah, 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 and the question engineers ask each other, are you doing that in the box or are you doing it out of the box? And the answer is usually, in the box, or actually out of the box. And what that means is, in the box means that you're mixing and editing and doing everything in the computer, reduced down to that one little finger flicking the mouse around. Or out of the box means working in an analog studio, which is how we all learnt our skills, how we all learned to hear. And that's basically why I chose that, to discuss this relationship between digital and analog audio. So these are the things I'll be looking at today. The actual workflow in the digital domain and the analog domain. Analog synthesis versus plugins, plug-in synthesizers. And then the mixing process of mixing in the box, meaning using software. Then to kind of continue the analog theme about discussing the return to vinyl that's happened in the last few years. And then finally, I want to introduce the theremin. Now, I mean, one of the things I want to really bring out today is that it's all very easy saying that there isn't so much of an audio difference between analog sources and digital sources. But my point and my experience is that using the digital technology changes the content, that you approach the content differently in your music. You actually, if you're a composer and a producer, you come out with a different result if you work in the box. Now the thing with the theremin is it is the most analog of all analog electric instruments. I mean, you can't define any pitches. There's no discrete steps in pitch, volume, in anything. You're completely free. So for a lot of people, I mean, I see a lot of you are young enough to have grown up entirely in surrounded by digital technology. You might find it even a bit scary. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm going to be covering. I mean, you're obviously all smart people. You're all educated people. Oh, by the way, yes, adding to that, of course, I'm speaking in, for most of you, maybe your second or third language. So if there's anything you don't understand while I rattle off in English, please stop me and ask, yeah? Basic digital theory, referring to audio. The way that it may seem ridiculously obvious, but I have to go over it just to make sure that everyone gets it, is that the way that we store and record audio as digital files is using this method here, sometimes called PCM, where you have basically a little switch that opens. A little switch opens and allows in a voltage from an analog source, be that a microphone or an amplifier or even from a synthesizer. And for a tiny fraction of a second, 44,000th or 48,000th of a second, little switch is open, and the voltage created by that source goes to a capacitor, and that voltage is then measured and stored as a number. And that number will either be recorded as 16 bits or 8 bits or 24 bits. So you have a very, very wide resolution for recording these tiny little fractions of time. Small enough to be able to slice a gentle analog-shaped wave like this into individual numbers. And so already we have the resolution and we have the sample rate. And the sample rate is how often those little slices are taken, those little moments of time. And each of them is then stored as a number. And the theory is, well, the practice is that you play back those numbers at exactly the same speed, and it will create an analogy, an analog of the original waveform. Makes sense? Easy peasy? Did we all kind of know that? Yes, yes. The problem is that there's a few extra little things that doesn't really go in the manual with this kind of shit. Basically, you can see that the relationship between the digital wave and the analog wave there, which is in red, one of it's all spiky, it's got all kind of little steps in it. And those steps are taken out of the sound with a filter. Okay, so what you're seeing is what actually comes out of the box with the digital playback. And then that has to be filtered off all those edges. And those filters are, again, modulating your audio file. They're modulating what's coming out of the machine. Next, of course, you've got the accuracy of the clock. How often it takes the little slices on the way in. If it's not exactly the same as how often it takes the little slices on the way out, or it fluctuates, then you've got a problem. And another aspect, which is something that was actually pointed out with the earliest CDs, is the fact that the regularity with which the slices are taken is a wave in itself. Yeah, is a pitch. And if you, as we all know, if you have two pitches happening at the same time, if you're tuning a guitar or you're tuning any instrument, if you have two pitches happening at the same time, they beat against each other. And that beating, that relationship causing a third wave, is called aliasing. Now, does anyone know the name, recognize the name Rupert Neve? Rupert Neve, yeah. Rupert Neve the name is famous because he designed and built these wonderful mixing desks started in the 60s. And he's just one of these people with this incredible ear that he's used to make this wonderful technology over the years. So that's trained his hearing. And when CDs first came along, he said, I don't trust these things because I can hear the aliasing. And it was like, oh, for God's sake, Rupert, shut up. Fuck off. And of course, as time has gone on and our hearing has been educated, we can all hear the aliasing. it's a particular kind of distortion in the high frequencies of CDs and of digital audio, which we've all grown up with, but makes it a little bit tiring to listen to. And that was the aliasing that Rupert pointed out right at the very beginning. Another thing that makes, I want to make these points clear because for a lot of people, digital audio is so universal and so universally accepted and is considered to be a series of stored numbers that always comes back the same and you can always trust it. Okay, there are other things, other problems with digital audio. One of them is dither. Do any of you know what dither is? Yeah, cool. Basically, you can see here, you have a waveform that's suddenly this block shape. And so you use a filter to take off the little edges so you get back to your nice shape. The question is what happens between 0 and 1? Yeah? That there is always like a little, it has to jump from 0 to 1. Now what you're doing if you're asking something to jump from 0 to 1, when you're transferring it into the analog world, is you're asking an object, which is basically the cone on your speaker, to be in two places at the same time. You're sort of asking for quantum physics to suddenly appear in your bedroom, which is kind of pushing our technology a little bit, yeah? And the impact of that is, I remember this from the very early days of digital audio, is that you'd make a nice fade out that would nicely fade out to 0, and just right at the very quietest moment at the end, you'd get this little squeak, this little ee that would happen. And that is this series of 0 to 1s happening. So, to overcome this problem, dither was invented. Now, dither is a wonderful word. It's a wonderful, complex, hard to really translate English word. But what it actually really is noise. Yeah? So our wonderful, noiseless digital audio, to stop the little squeaky shit happening, they added noise to it. Okay? And so you have to be aware that this what was sold to us as this wonderful new perfection of sound was something that has a lot of grey areas. And the grey areas that we have to learn to hear. It's often when you're presented with new sound and new audio, you have to, it's the same with any musical instrument, if you're from a different culture and you're suddenly presented with a symphony orchestra, you'll be knocked out by it. But the guy sitting next to you will know that that's the local youth orchestra, and all the clarinets are out of tune, And it's the same with digital audio, that we're actually at the point of having to learn now what the problems are and learn to hear them. Now, of course, this is with what I'm talking about here is high quality, super high quality, undata compressed PCM digital audio. I'm not even going to mention MP3. Okay, and that is another world where it's data compression. It's very important not to confuse data compression with dynamic compression. Okay, so that's a kind of basic introduction to it all. I presume most of you know most of that, but it's kind of important to reinforce what it is that we're dealing with digital audio. Yeah. So when you're, I'm not talking about using digital audio for distribution or for use or for the final artifact. What I'm kind of concentrating on is the actual work process, the workflow of working within the digital domain compared to working in the analog domain. And the medium has a massive impact on the content. So I just want to play you two pieces of music, which are actually musically down deep in terms of a kind of, from a musicologist's point of view, are actually related in a way. But I'll play the first one. This is by a guy called Ryoji Ikeda. from a couple of years ago. It's from 2009, I think, this piece. There's a little video as well. Okay, it's quite a nice little piece that. I mean, you can see from the title, it's called Data Microhelix. You know, I mean, so it's such a wonderfully digital artifact that. I mean, it's such a great little piece that. I mean, in lots of ways, from the title onwards, you know, he's saying straight away, what I'm dealing with here is data. You know, I'm not dealing with a performance. This is data. Okay, and now I just want to, out of contrast, I'll just play you this piece which is a dub by Keith Hudson. This is from 1972. Okay, I mean, two bits of music that seem to be from different planets, but actually they're very, very closely related in a lot of ways. Musically, rhythmically, very, very closely related. But the biggest thing that links those two bits of music is that they're both massively about the technology that they're made with. The Keith Hudson dub, I mean, if any of you have ever seen a live dub mix happening or taken part in a live dub mix, basically what we're hearing there is he's got a multi-track with the drums and the bass, you've got the drums and the bass, the guitars, the melodica and the voices. So we've just got four faders on a little desk, and some reverb and some EQ and some delay, and he's playing the technology to make the music appear in the way that it was, in exactly the same way that Ryoji Ikeda was. But what Keith Hudson has is, of course, he's working in the analog world, which means a very, very different experience for us on the receiving end. One of the things with which the Ikeda piece shows really well is that what computers are absolutely fantastic at, and what we love them for, is their ability to organize material, to make lists, to make endless fucking lists of Excel this and shit that all adds up to something or other somewhere. But it's a way of organizing data to comply with a previously conceived list. And the whole of the Ikeda piece is made from one sound. It's made from putting your thumb on the end of a jack lead and getting that hum. It's the 50 hertz hum with the click at the beginning. And he's organized that tiny, tiny little piece of material into data microhelix, yeah? Now with the Keith Hudson piece, it's performances. It's four, maybe five guys playing, and it's a performance by 4 or 5 people, which started at a specific point and ran all the way through, with all the problems, all the complexity, all the warmth, all the weirdness that could possibly happen, with no undo buffer, okay? And that is, in fact, in my experience dealing with students, when I get my students to start to work in the analog domain, what they miss the most and what is the most exhilarating is the lack of the undo buffer. You know, that suddenly the safety net is gone, and it's like, shit, I'm alive. You know, if I make a mistake, that's my mistake. You know, the concentration goes up through the roof. Yeah, you know, you've got one chance to do this performance. It's going to go down on tape, and that's it. Get it right, and suddenly the recording studio becomes a place of performance. It's scary, but it's someone mentioned to me yesterday about this. Something that Brian Eno had come up with. Eno's following me around at the moment. I keep quoting Eno. I always try to avoid quoting Brian, but he seems to be coming up a lot at the moment. And something that he said recently was that with the art form of theatre, we see theatre as one thing and cinema as something else. Where in music, we just refer to it all as music. Why isn't recorded music given the same separate approach that we give cinema compared to theatre? And this is the thing that starts to happen if you start to work in the analog domain in the studio. You start to do live dubs, you've got one take to get it right, and you start to bring in these dramatic theatrical elements of what would be theatre, what is live music. And that exhilaration, that concentration, the audience feel it. The audience hear it. Now, if you can do that in a way that is, even if you're working in the analog, in the digital domain, if you can behave in a way where there is live performances going on, the real performances going on, that has an impact on how the audience feel the music. If you get this kind of long list of beautifully worked out, cleaned up, perfect little moments in the data microhelix, it's a little bit cold, you know? It's not quite as exciting as it should be. You know, you can turn it up massively, but it's still pretty much a list of events. Yeah? Okay. So let's have a look. So yes, there's no undo buffer. Making decisions is a part of that, having no undo buffer. It's so easy to delay decisions when you're working in the digital domain. You know, it's like, oh, I'll go back and do that later. Or I've saved it how it is, I'll go and look back at it later on. You know, I've got students and friends who have had projects that have been hanging around for decades because they can always go back and fiddle with it again, you know? And there is also, it's quite a disease with the business end of it as well. It's often when you go to, when you deliver music to a record company these days, somebody who is basically, a businessman, in inverted commas, who works for a record company, now listens to the material and says, oh, could we turn the bass down a bit? Or, you know, could we have a bit more reverb on the blah, blah, blah? And of course, a lot of producers want to just keep the record company happy, and they go, okay, they go back to their project and they rework it a little bit. Of course, up until the early 2000s, that was impossible. You'd made the artifact, and that was the artifact. And it's like, are you going to put it out, or am I going to take it somewhere else? You know, and you know that, as I was saying before, that the concentration, the exhilaration of making decisions, and they're your decisions, and you have to stand by them, it sounds restrictive, it sounds scary, but actually it's liberating, because you don't carry around this trail of an undo buffer behind you all your, you know, through your work life, in the same way that you wouldn't do it in your actual life, you know, if you've still got any left. Now this is an interesting one. Playback time is not loops of a few milliseconds. One of the advantages of working with digital technology in the studio is that you can zoom in so much. You can just zoom into, it's this bar that's got the problem. So you just loop around this bar until you fix the problem. Now this is something you couldn't do with the analog technology. You had to listen to the thing, then rewind, and then listen and find the bit, and rewind, and then, oh, well, let's just go for it. And I've heard some bizarre pieces of music, particularly, again, you know, mentioning my students. Fortunately, because I'm in Porto, none of my students are here, so I can be as mean about them as I want. But, you know, I hear these pieces of music where, you know, you walk into the studio and someone's just fiddling around with one tiny little loop. You say, oh, come on, now just relax. Let's listen to the whole thing. So you hear this kind of relaxed piece of music, and then the bar that they've been working on happens. It's like, fuck me, what is that? You know, and then it goes back to what it was before. And you hear these incredible little bursts of you know, real detailed, overworked, rococo little moments appear in music that's been worked on in the digital domain, which are unnecessary and only appear because of the fact that the technology is guiding you to do that, you know. And I mean, I'm sure the same issue happens in design, that you can just zoom into like tiny little fragments, and you know, there is nothing within the technology saying stand back, you know, like listen to the whole thing, see the whole thing, you know. So that's important. Now, this is a bit of an esoteric, almost esoteric issue. Warmth. It's something that we talk about a lot in digital audio versus analog audio, and it's like the holy grail of digital audio is to find the beautiful analog warmth. Now, analog warmth is basically it's like a fata morgana, you know. It's lots and lots and lots of different things that all together produce a sort of indefinable effect that just makes you feel more comfortable. The majority of what warmth is inaccuracy. One of the ways that we've all been sold and everyone fell for digital audio so much was because of its absolute accuracy. But actually, what people don't want to hear accuracy. They want to hear something that's comfortable. One of the things with analog audio is that it's inaccurate in the sense that it can't really handle these massive jumps in sound pressure levels in a very short space of time, because there's a physical movement of stuff going on, particularly in microphones, etc. And what that does is just smooth out the high frequencies and makes it all just much more comfortable to listen to. There is a wonderful, really wonderful, very long article in Sound on Sound magazine. This is online, if you want to look this up, on analog warmth in Sound on Sound magazine from February 2010 by a guy called Hugh Robjohns. Actually, have I written this out already? Yeah. And this is a quote from it. To my mind, digital recording systems can now deliver pretty much all that was once promised, a near-perfect recording medium that gives back exactly what was recorded. That's great in some circumstances, but it's not always what we want. In many cases, the technical limitations and imperfections of analog systems have become an integral part of the quality of the recorded sounds that we all grew up with. I mean, I'd go further than that. They're integral to the sounds that we surround us. And the end result is perceived by many people as being more pleasing than we can easily achieve today with all digital recording chains. Further than that, some of the sounds resulting from abuse of analog gear have become recognized effects in their own right. Tube overdrive, tape saturation being obvious examples. So there's the link at the bottom. It's a really good piece, that, because he's completely, he's very desperate to be ambivalent. You know, he's not saying the analog domain is clearly better. It's a really good piece. It's worth looking up. I always go backwards and forward. Okay, and there are aspects to. I mean, they mentioned there in that piece the abuse of analog audio is something that we've become used to, and has this aspect of warmth to it. Now, one of the things with digital audio is that if it's being abused or misused or is not at its highest quality, then that has an impact on how you actually construct your music. You compose your music. And one of those here is the reduced physical and gestural connection, the mouse and MIDI controllers. Now, again, this is another holy grail, and also a kind of sort of examined revenue stream for a lot of the digital audio and software developers, is finding MIDI controllers, finding ways to get people out of this thing that you're reduced down to basically one button and one finger, which is what a mouse is. So Ableton have released this push thing, and there's all sorts of various boxes that can be used as an instrument. But the essential thing is that when people, I see it all the time, when people are working working on the computer, working in the box, they have these machines, these controllers around them, but what tends to happen is they get sucked into the screen, and they're looking at the screen, and they're moving with the little finger again. They're reduced down to the little finger and the little click. So there's no gesture left. There's no performance actually in the recorded and created artifact anymore. And God love them. They're trying to, the developers are trying to find ways to get people away from that. But what tends to happen is that you get, at the very early creative stage, people will use the controllers. and write the basis of their music with the controller, like click, 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 boom, 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 way, there we go, and then push it to the side, go back to the screen, and back to being one little finger and one little button again, you know, which is, you know, I mean, I live in a very physical world. I mean, I've been a martial artist for years and years, and I find it quite scary to see people hunched over, like this, kind of reduced down to these tiny little movements. It's a bit unhealthy, really, you know. Okay, another thing with you know, I mentioned before about you know, the basic technology of digital audio is that you know, there are problems with it. It's not perfect. It's not just a list of numbers that always come back the same. And when you get errors with digital audio, which we've all heard, the clicks, the squeaks, all these kind of strange effects of aliasing, that they are not effects that are in within the harmonic series. Does everyone know what the harmonic series is? Yeah, good. You know everything. Yeah. But the harmonic series is basically, it's the way that overtones of sounds happen in nature, and how you get the character of sounds in nature by what turned out to be a fixed series of frequencies that relate to a fundamental frequency. And when in the analog domain, whatever you do, if you use overdrive, whatever mistake, whatever dopey thing you do, if you drop the tape in the bath and then put it back on the tape machine, and you know, whatever you do, it's the result is still in keeping with the harmonic series. With digital errors, the harmonic series doesn't count at all. It's basically the only way the harmonic series counts is when it gets the resonance of a room or the resonance of a loudspeaker box. And what that means is that before you've cleaned all that out of your performances in Ableton or Pro Tools or Logic or GarageBand or whatever, you're hearing a lot of stuff that is not how sound functions in nature, and it's just really tiring. It's really quite hard work. I mean, it's like so I suppose the kind of visual equivalent would be that if suddenly you could put on a pair of glasses where everything was slightly pixelated. You know, that there's this sort of this very kind of completely inorganic filter across what you're seeing, and it just wears you out, you know. And that's why people tend to. Well, I mean, this is something I was going to get onto later on, but this is my own experience. If I have people around to my house and I play records, put vinyl on, there will be a discussion of like, oh yeah, I don't like that record, or what are you playing that shit for, blah, blah, blah. But people can listen to vinyl for hours. You put a CD on, and after 20 minutes, someone's like, can you turn that down a bit? There's a harshness, you know, that there's this, because there's an element of the sound that doesn't work with the harmonic series, it actually just tires you out a bit. It tires your hearing out. It's a bit like living next to a motorway. You know, that you've got that your brain is having to do something to block out this sound all the time, and our hearing is incredibly powerful. You know. And this is something I came across. I mentioned earlier on was how wonderful computers are for organizing material, and then you get this sort of excessive reliance on the artifacts of organization rather than a performance itself, you know. I'm perfectly happy for people to do that. I think that's great when people do that, as long as they're aware of it, you know. I mean, this is a, well, maybe the awareness leads right on to my experiences in Berlin a couple of weeks ago. Do you all know this company Ableton? And they make this software, incredibly successful, very, very popular software called Ableton Live, which has expanded, and it's fabulously easy to use. And their head of marketing, again, I mean, you know, I hope he's not listening to this. Very, very nice guy, Stefan, has been in touch with me because essentially, you know, it's a way of moving into education for their product. And I've always been very wary of this particular technology because I didn't like the sound of it, because it's based on granular synthesis. There's problems with the audio. And so they said, okay, well, look, we'll give you a free training session. If you're ever in Berlin, come and have a free training session. So I went and sat with one of their top programmers. It was a lovely bloke, and we had this kind of in-depth, non-stop discussion for 6 hours, you know. And there was this magical moment where, you know, I said to him, okay, well, look, we've talked about the engine, we've talked about the higher level stuff. Let's just get down to the real basics of how you start composing with this stuff. So he had the screen in front of him, grabbed something off a list, dropped it onto a little area on the screen, and immediately, in 4/4, at 120 BPM, there was a Nile Rodgers loop, perfectly looped. Boom, 2, 3, 4, boom. And I was like, stop! You know, when I teach programming to my students, people who are total beginners, I get them to look at the interface and say, before you do anything, look at the tempo and look at the time signature and make a decision. But decide what you want to do. Do you want to work in 7/8? Do you want to work in 6/8? Is it a quick piece you're going to write? Is it a slow piece? What is it you're going to do? The thing with software like Ableton is before you switch the thing on and it says to you, you know, it's saying to you 4/4, 120. Maybe you can push it up to 138 after you've worked on it for a bit. But it's making these avenues so easy to go to fall into that starts leading the actual content, the way that people compose music with this stuff. And you know, it has cultural knock-ons. Of course, now we think of dance music as being this very specific thing, 4 on the floor kick drum in a very limited range of tempos. And anything outside of that just isn't dance music anymore. You go to, I went to discos in the 80s, which were like big, you know, like everyone on the dance floor, arms up in the air, and across the night you would have had a massive range of tempos, you would have had different time signatures, you would have had tunes with a stop in the middle, tunes that sped up and slowed down. You know, you had this huge variation. Now, because of the box, we're all in the box, you know? And it's because of the ease of use that we're led into making these decisions that are essentially made for us, yeah? It sounds a little bit, I don't want to sound too kind of conspiratorial, but it's something, it's basically, people are trying to make things easy for us, but they've made particular avenues so easy that it's having a cultural side effect on the music that we're actually making, you know? So back into the analog world for a bit. Brian again. I found this quote from Brian. This was the first time I thought, shit, I've got to share this from Brian. And this is really worth thinking about this. The trouble begins with a design philosophy that equates more options with greater freedom. Designers struggle endlessly with a problem that is almost non-existent for users. How do we pack the maximum number of options into the minimum space and price? In my experience, the instruments and tools that endure because they are loved by their users have limited options. And that is exactly my experience. It's exactly my experience. Since so much of our experience is mediated in some way or another, we have deep sensitivity to the signatures of different media. Artists play with these sensitivities, digesting the new and shifting the old. In the end, the characteristic forms of a tool's or medium's distortion, of its weakness and limitations, become sources of emotional meaning and intimacy. Okay? And I find that fits in so perfectly with my experience of the last 30-odd years in music. And also with my experiences, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, playing analog electronic music. Okay. So I'm kind of rushing on a little bit because I want to show you the theremin basically. Synthesizers. I play the synthesizer. I'm a synthesist. I love synthesizers. And synthesizers are largely in electronic music being replaced by plugins. Everyone aware what a plugin is? It's basically just a little bit of software that appears like an object on your desktop, but actually is just a bit of software. I had a great experience a couple of years ago in Cologne, again in Germany. There's an organization called the Synth Museum, and they put together this wonderful display at an event called Cologne Pop, where they had a massive display of Roland, ARP, and Korg synthesizers, basically their whole collection, but all hooked up, all functioning, and all ready there for you to play with, you know. So there was basically just get in there and play with this wonderful stuff. And I was talking to the guys who were running it, and I was asking them how they were going, how it was going, and they said that the scariest thing that was happening was that more than once, kids had come in. People, I say kids, you know, people 16, 17, 18, had come in and seen something like a Jupiter 8 and said, like, wow, someone's built the plugin. Right, okay. Now that's a while ago. So, you know, there's a whole generation of people who've grown up with plugins, and then when they see the actual physical object, they think it's a representation of what the original thing is, what's online, you know. That's a bit scary. Now, of course, real synthesizers, which are bits of hardware, bits of analog hardware, have this wonderful audio quality. You know, I mean, I've done A/B tests with software versions of synths that I own. You know, you set the settings up exactly the same, and one of them you get this big emotional response that you react to, and the other one is dead, like a 3-day-old fish on a plate. You know, I mean, that's the difference. It's an enormous difference. A lot of the synthesizer plugins, they use an enormous amount of effects, lots of reverb, lots of chorus, lots of delay built into the sound to cover up the fact that the basic audio engines are terrible, especially compared to a real analog synthesizer that's been made by hand. Another aspect is which ties in with a lot with analog stuff is wabi-sabi. Has anyone come across this expression, wabi-sabi? No? Okay, wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is this is one worth checking out yourselves later on. It's a Japanese expression, and for some Japanese people refer to it as the epitome of Japanese culture. And even it's very, very hard even to translate the words themselves. Some people translate the word as honorable rust. Okay, it's basically translates in the West as patina. Yeah. So when an object has become used and is old and has had some character and people have loved it and they've come and gone, then it starts to develop wabi-sabi. And it's interesting with Japanese DJs, particularly Japanese turntablists, because that side of hip-hop, that turntablism thing, was particularly big in Japan, was that the individual pieces of vinyl with only those clicks on where you put that needle on when you were a kid, blah, 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 that has an enormous resonance. This has an enormous importance because that record, in being around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, has wabi-sabi, yeah? I mean, the Japanese take this to a fantastic extreme that even words, a word can have wabi-sabi. You know, like they can have these ideas of being used and having character and patina. And that, of course, is something that's completely missing in a virtual musical instrument. You know, if you call up something like Contact, which is this huge sample bank, you call it up and you see like a picture of a string section.
a real string section, each of the individual instruments can be hundreds and hundreds of years old, could be covered in varnish that have got tiny little slivers of precious stones in them from the mortal and pestle from the guy in Verona. This is all there. And of course, it's something that's all missing in the virtual world. Craftsmanship, again, the physical manufacture of things is something that adds quality, adds character, adds wabi-sabi. We have to balance the complexity that you can derive from things being inaccurate. The inaccuracy of how inefficient a microphone is can give it enormous character, can add extra things to your recordings. And then, of course, serendipity. Does anyone know this word, serendipity? Serendipity is a nice English word. It's quite a bonkers English word. I think I've got a definition of it here. The occurrence and development of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way. Of course, this is something that we all love and we all come across in creativity. But with analog instruments, including analog synthesizers, we're much more chance of encountering serendipity. The wonderful thing again about computers is your ability to define things precisely, to make precise lists of things, but effectively you always know what's going on. I mean, my band, it's three of us with homemade synthesizers, and when we're making a noise, one of the big questions is that you or is that me? It's like, where is that racket coming from? And those moments of serendipity where you lose yourself into the world of chance is genuine creativity, I find. So yes, it came from Horace Walpole. Walpole came up with the word. A tale of a fairy tale in which the heroes were always making discoveries by accidents and sagacity of things they were not in the quest of. Okay, that's serendipity. Okay, now this is a little film of Metamono's gear that we made with a nice little text, just as a bit of a breather, really.
We also have sound houses, where we practice and demonstrate all sounds and their generation. We have harmonies, which you have not, of quarter sounds and lesser slides of sounds. Diverse instruments of music likewise to you unknown, some sweeter than any you have, together with bells and rings that are dainty and sweet. We represent small sounds as great and deep, likewise diverse trembling and warblings of sounds, which in their original are entire. We represent and imitate all articulate sounds and letters, and the voices of beasts and birds. We have certain helps, which set to the ear to do further the hearing greatly. We also have diverse, strange and artificial echoes, reflecting the voice many times, and as if it were tossing it, and some that give back the voice louder than it came, some shriller and some deeper, yea, some rendering the voice, differing in the letters or articulate sound from that they receive. We have also means to convey sounds in tubes and pipes, in strange lines and distances.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine how confusing it is working with that sort of technology, and how serendipity and wabi-sabi are the names of the game. And that text, actually, if you want to look it up, was from Francis Bacon, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare, and writing about a kind of utopian world. But that is in contrast to this wonderful thing. Retro sound, modern performance. Brilliant, look at this, Contact. Retro Machines Mark II is a collection of 16 definitive analog synthesizers and keyboards lovingly sampled. Now, isn't that an oxymoron? How can you love something and sample it? You know, lovingly sampled and refined for the world's leading sample platform, Contact 5. Now, this is a wonderful plugin. It does everything, yeah? And it's based on samples, and it even the interface looks a bit old and beaten up. Look at the wabi-sabi of that wonderful surface. But of course, it's exactly the same every time you open it. It's exactly the same on every computer it's ever been opened on. And I mean, I find this particular way of selling things is basically really disingenuous. You know, I mean, one of the aspects, again, it says lovingly sampled. When you sample sounds and then play them back, it's just a repetition. It's just a repetition, and it's a digital repetition. So you've got no chance for any genuine variation. Yeah, you've got no chance for it to actually evolve or change character at all, other than extra processing on top. And that's one of the things why that world of the digital attempts to kind of recreate analog audio has become so dire and so dead. Basically, it needs to be shaken up. So yes, blah blah blah. I'm going to move on a little bit. Can we speed up a little bit? Yeah, input. We talked about the mouse, finite versus the infinite. Of course, anything digital is finite. It's controlled specifically within specific boundaries. Real thing versus the model. A friend of mine works in. She works as she's a sculptor who works with paper, and one of the things that she discovered was that over the last 10 years, pop-up books have really improved in quality and complexity. Do you know what I mean by pop-up books? These where you open it this way and a structure comes out at you. And I mean, if you go to a kid's bookshop these days, you'll be really impressed at how that whole scene has developed. You know, it's not just a kind of laughing mouth at you anymore. It's like entire structures open out of the pages at you. One of the reasons is that you can plan it in advance. You can make a model of it in your computer. But then you make it real with the paper. And that, for me, is one of the things, one of the ways that we should approach the digital side of the creative part of music making, is that we make models with it and then we make it real. Yeah, that's a way of a way of generating a hybrid and making the best out of it. Constant direct, blah blah blah. I mentioned that earlier on. Another thing, restricted range. Well, again, restrictions are a sort of freedom. I mean, you saw that in the little film I just showed you, the instrumentarium film, is that the range of gear that I use with Metamono, and we are very restricted by it. But musically, it's some of the widest range of music that I've ever been involved with. It's because if you only have a handful of sounds, then you have character. Then it's immediate that you immediately know it's this bunch of people because it has that same fingerprint of sound, which means that you're liberated with the actual content, yeah? Which is the reverse of what we're being offered with GarageBand, Ableton, blah, blah, blah. We're given everything, and we end up using nothing. Another little quick anecdote. After my meeting in Berlin the other day, I had a drink with a mastering engineer, a mastering engineer in Berlin, so all day in, day out, all he gets is techno, you know. And he said, I now know the first 10 kick drums on the list in Ableton Live, because every single track, the kick drum is just one of those first 10 kicks. Now, if you open up Ableton Live, you've got something like 35 gigabyte library of sounds, but the artists are only using the first few that turn up on the list. They just want to get on with it, you know? And consequently, this huge library has ended up in a system whereby people are only using the first 10, okay? And, you know, this is for music that is actually being mastered and is ready to go out to the public. So I think that's a good example of the impact that this stuff is having on us. Democratization, of course, everyone can get hold of this stuff. So of course it's fairer, but the reality is very, very different. And when it comes to the artists having some share in the means of production, the end result is that my royalty returns at the moment consist of what's called in the trade micro payments. You know, I mean, Spotify, Pandora, etc., online plays. There's just no money in it anymore. It's very, very, very difficult to live as a composer these days of any sort of style of music when it's what initially seemed to us as a way of democratizing the means of production has ended up with us all being bloody penniless. But that's another issue. But it's all to do with this. Yeah, mixing. I mean, mostly you're not mix engineers, and a lot of this we've kind of covered already. Serendipity, indeterminacy. The evil of the pictures is an interesting one. Of course, music is about your ears, and in the old analog studio, you would have a tape machine that could possibly be in a completely separate room, and you'd hit play, and you'd have to listen to stuff to find out what was going on. Nowadays, of course, you've got a display telling you what's going on, but often that's just not true. You know, often I've got terrible experiences with people where I've listened to a piece that someone's working on and say, oh look, on the 2 and the 4, the kick drum and the snare drum are out of time. They're not happening at the same time because I hear it. And they say, yes, they are. Look. You can see one is on top of the other. Look at the screen. They are happening at the same time. And it's very easy to be drawn into, or to have your hearing led by the picture of what it says you're hearing. Yeah. So that's something to bear in mind when you're working on the computer. Yeah, significant use of language, living in the box. No one really wants to live in a box, do they? And I mean, one of the last things is for a lot of you, if you're working with software to make music, one of the major windows in your software will be a mixer page, and the mixer is literally a model of an analog mixing desk. That there still isn't a really digital way of presenting a workflow that isn't informed by the analog world, because the analog world got it right. You know, I mean, the reason it looks like a mixer in there is because a mixer is the best way to do it. You know. So yes, working out of the box is, I mean, that's just a lot of ways of just saying a lot more fun. Okay, hybrids. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like too much of a kind of, well, I don't want to sound dogmatic. And the reality is, of course, is the best way to work with all this is to work to play to the strengths of the gear. Yeah. So I mean, in general, you use analog technology and analog techniques for improvisation, for charm, character, for audio character, and the digital gear for what it's good at, which is organization, storage, distribution and communication. Again, with pop-up books. One of the other advantages is stems. Stems is something we talk about a lot when we're mixing. Is you do an analog mix, but instead of just mixing it down into one final product, you'll mix all the drums, all the instruments, all the voices, whatever, in separate stems, and then you can treat them separately later on in the digital domain. So you've done 80-90% of your mix in the analog domain, and you do the last little touches in the digital domain. Using samplers as instruments is something that's developed. Some of you may have come across this wonderful device, the MPC series of samplers, and they're effectively real instruments and wonderful designs. That's why they're so popular. But they're digital audio. It's as a sampler, but they're designed in a very clever way. And then lastly, something from my own experience is I worked on a big job of mine that went on for a few years was collecting the audio archive from this German band from the 70s, Can. And one of my jobs was to make all this kind of mess of little bits of outtakes and whatever into music. And that was, just to give you an idea of the process, it was all on analog tape. It was transferred to digital, which meant a high quality digital, which meant we could listen to it all. Then we made a selection of which bits to use. And then I made collages with it all using digital technology, and then mixed it using analog technology back through a desk using analog gear to keep the character, because this was all material that was recorded in the 60s and 70s. And I'll just play you a piece now, which is actually a very complex, digitally edited piece of music, but you can hear that by using the technology in a hybrid way, you can get a genuine flavour. Do I have to press play? Yeah. This is called Millionenspiel, and this was put together with tiny fragments that were all outtakes from music for a TV show from '68, I think. Okay, so the idea of that piece is it was completely put together from the tiny little fragments and little outtakes that were used for the on the soundtrack of the film, and to make it into a piece of music again. Of course, I had to rely on digital technology, but then use any treatment, any EQ or anything that I had to do. I did it all out of the box. So there's a nice little hybrid. Now I was going to talk about vinyl. Look at that. Look, there's the groove. Look at that little fella there. If I'm going to introduce the theremin to you, I think we better skip the vinyl thing. But you've got the picture, I think, by now, yeah. So theremin. Now it may seem strange to kind of introduce an instrument at this point, you know, having talked about digital gear and whatever. But the theremin is in many ways the ultimate analog instrument because there's no discrete steps in any way. If we have a look at so look, I'm playing it with various parts of my body now. So this is my theremin here. This was built for me in '95, and this guy up here, this is the inventor, Leon Theremin. And this little film was made quite a few years after the original invention of it. It was invented. The first use of the copyright was in 1927, I think. But the official date of invention is 1926. But just let's have a listen to Leon himself here.
Электромузыкальный инструмент терминвокс – это первый инструмент такого типа. Это песенно-голосовой инструмент. В нем управление мелодией достигается посредством влияния на электромагнитное поле около инструмента.
I mean that's a really lovely thing, but to me, I mean that's such an artifact. That says so many things. First of all, it's just such a long time ago. I mean it's a really long time ago, and secondly, his posture and his position. He looks like he's in pain. You know, because you can see that he's kind of working against himself. An old Jamaican friend of mine who used to talk about her dad was such a terrible dancer that she used to say he looks like he's beating himself up, and it's a similar. He's like incredibly stiff, and it's because what he's trying to do is he's trying to play music that was composed for different instruments, different interfaces, music that was composed to work with discrete steps on an instrument which doesn't deal with discrete steps. Yeah? And so you could see the suffering he was going through when he was playing out of tune there. But the important thing with the theremin is that you don't have that. The only reference points that you have are your position in space and your relative position in space and the relative position of parts of you compared to the rest of, compared to the instrument. I mean, this comes through with, I mean, Grove's Dictionary of Music for the English-speaking world. This is the book that you go to for classical music information. And it kind of, you know, it talks about the theremin, but it doesn't really mention the fact. Well, it does mention it, but it doesn't really recognize the potential, because it's talking about music which is composed as a series of steps for classical musicians to be able to look at the score and realize it. And that's just not how this instrument works. What's this? Oh, that's a little film from there. That's another kind of historical film. We can look at that later on if we've got time. I know we're in a little bit of a rush. Now, my feeling with the theremin is it was invented more than that, like almost 100 years ago. But its day is yet to come. I often think of it like the saxophone. That the saxophone was invented in the mid-19th century as something to add a little bit of weight to the horns, to the woodwind section in symphony orchestras. And it sort of sat there not doing much. Not many composers wrote for it, and it was sort of used a bit. There was never any big concertos for it. And then 80, 90 years later, boom, we've got John Coltrane. You know, it was suddenly when it fell into different hands and realized what it could really do was the important thing. Now, I'll just give you. Do I need to use the microphone? Because you need two hands to work this. I need a mic stand. Thank you very much. You played it yourself. I mean, the way that it works. The way that it works is basically there's two antennas. Antenna is not really the right word because they're basically capacitors, and it's the body capacitance that changes the signal. So you've got one antenna that's the volume, which is up and down, and another one which is the pitch. And you've only got your hearing to work with. So I couldn't tell you any of the pitches I just played, but the reason I could get a melody out of it was just the relationship of those pitches. And again, it's about where your body is in space. So if I say I move my hand in relationship to my body, I get an effect. But if I keep my hand in the same place in my body, but move my body, I get a different effect. So it's very, very different to any other musical instrument, most importantly because you don't touch it, but secondly because it is completely intuitive. And a nice little story is when I first bought this, I lived in a shared house in London, which had a bit of an open door. It was one of those places you live in your 20s, 30s. And I set the thing up in my living room, plugged into the hi-fi, and just let people come in and play. And it was fascinating, just, you know, a range of people from little kids to the milkman to, you know, everyone coming and try and play it with their feet. The whole lot of people, you'd see kids come in and play, and they'd get that look on their face. So that it was just, you know, just this concentration. And what was interesting was that wherever you were in the house, you kind of knew who it was that was playing, because people started, you could hear the signature of the individuals and how they approached the machine. So we're running out of time a little bit. Please come and have a go. Who wants to come and have a go on the machine, and I will talk them through it. Who feels musical? After all, is sitting down. Come on, come on, man. Okay, so it's volume and pitch. You have controls for the sensitivity of each of the antennas, and so control for the sensitivity of the volume one is obvious, but for the pitch antenna, you can get these quite extreme effects. You can go down to basically nothing. Yeah. And that's the full range of the instrument, which is kind of almost the full range of our hearing. I had a great experience using this particular theremin through a massive PA system at a festival in Brighton, just on the south coast of Britain. Yeah. And of course, it was all, you know, people playing stuff out of laptops and within this very limited audio range, and like, you know, and I plugged my theremin in, whack, and a huge PA system. And my first thought was like, how low can I take this? You know, a wallop. And it got to the point where the boards on because all the sub bass units were under the stage, and the boards were shaking so much on the stage that the sound engineer couldn't run across the stage to stop me. And it was just like, yeah, this is a weapon. You know, I've achieved something here. Yes, so anyone else want to come and have a try? You're looking like you're itchy. Yeah, come on. I'll give you a bit of echo this time as well. Yeah. Nice. One last point. I mean, I think we're running out of time quite dramatically here. But one last point is this theremin, like most theremins, and like the theremin that Leon himself was playing earlier on, is logarithmic. If you imagine a piano keyboard, the distance between each of the octaves is the same, which means that the pitches are set out in a linear format. What happens in nature when you tighten your vocal cords or you make a string shorter is that the higher notes get closer together and the lower notes are further apart. And that's how the theremin operates. And so consequently, when you make these swoops, it behaves pitch-wise in the same way that pitch operates in nature. So that there is a strong relationship with singing, with these very, very low notes. People have said to me that, you know, it sounds like a wail. You know, there's lots of references to bird song and how sound operates from other species, which I think could open the door for further development and to take the theremin down to the zoo. You know, but as I say, I think from my own experience of playing this for I bought this in 20 years, just over 20 years I've had a theremin. It's incredibly limited. It's one sound, it only plays one note at a time, but I've been playing it for nearly 20 years, still finding out new things about it. That limitation is a liberation, and I personally think that its time is yet to come. I think that there is, as I say, I think the John Coltrane of the theremin could be in this room. You know what I mean? That's coming up. I think we better call it a day there, guys, because it's nearly 6:30. So thank you all very much. Oh, we got a question.
One question.
Is it a short one?
It's very short one. I see you putting it through echo filter over there.
Yes.
Can you put it through distortion and all the other filters we have?
Anything. It's just an audio signal. You can put it through anything. You can. Something I did in the 90s was make bass lines by sampling it. You know, it's an audio source. Once you've got an audio source, you can do anything you want with it.
So you can also make like bass, beat, and
beats are a little bit difficult because of the nature of the interface. But you can, of course, you can record it and edit it. You can make something that I tend to do is I use the sensitivity of the amplitude aerial, make it so insensitive that you actually have to tap it to make it work. So you can start to get rhythmic effects like that.
Has anybody ever used him in death metal?
To my knowledge, no. But, you know, this is, like I say, the John Coltrane of the theremin could be in this room. He could be wearing a hat, you know.
Could I suggest that the next John Coltrane of theremin is in this room, and he's going to do a short recital tomorrow at Passage Manuel at 10 p.m.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.